Our keynote address is Dr. Ziba Vaghri, I believe, sorry if I mispronounced that. Dr. Vaghri is the Director of Global Child Program and a faculty member of the School of Public Health and Social Policy at the University of Victoria. She has a long-standing interest in child rights and child health and development. Dr. Vaghri is a global health researcher with over 3 decades of experience in different areas of child health and development, from pediatric nurse to pediatric nutritionist to a child rights researcher and advocate. Her program of research links child development and child rights, 2 fields that have traditionally stayed disconnected from one another. Please welcome Dr. Vaghri.
Good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here. It is the energy here, the level of passion and enthusiasm for children. It's not a common thing to this volume in every conference. So I am very grateful to the Council of Child and Youth Advocates for inviting me, giving me the possibility to be part of this important event, and also an opportunity to share with you something that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is the outcome or the project that has been happening over a decade now. So in order to tell you about Global Child, a right-based approach to children's development and well-being, I like to go back a little bit and give you some information on the early start of this work and the international events that was happening in early 2000s in the global arena in order to put this project in a proper context for all of us. So in doing so, I'm going to be talking a little bit about an international crusade called World Health Organization's Commission on Social Determinants of Health. Some of you might be intimately familiar with that. And then from there, I'm going to be switching to talk about the convention itself and General Comment 7, which was, in my mind, a mini convention for young children. And then human rights in Canada, our achievement, our challenges, and last not least, how can we meet some of these challenges. In the last century, we managed to have some great achievements in the health area, and so some, at the same time, alarming statistics came that draw our attention to the fact that health is an inequitable commodity. Some of the achievements was like this. Since 1800, early 1800, almost half of the children survived. 1 out of 2 only survived when were born. And by the end of 2000, by current time, we have drastically reduced that and brought it up to less than 10% of children, average in the world. But look how is the distribution of that infant mortality. It varies from almost 120 in 1,000 live births in Afghanistan to less than 1 in Monaco. And our Canada, I think, is 4 point something. So there is large variation in this achievement. We have managed to reduce infant mortality, but not in an equitable manner. Statistics are like this: 5 children born in Burundi. Pierre lives to be 1, lives to be 36, Jean 57, Anne 72, Sarah 84. The same point of time, 5 children born in Sweden. Pierre lives to be 63, Lisa 77, Jan 84, Anton 88, and Sarah 93. So that brings the life expectancy of people born in Sweden to 81 versus those born in Burundi to 50. So huge difference. People are almost robbed of 35% of their gift of life because of being in certain area, not the other one. And this is gross, unjust, unfair, and we didn't need to look too far to understand what is causing this. This is one simple explanation. Here on y-axis, we have income per capita, and on x-axis, we have, on x-axis income per capita, on y-axis, we have life expectancy of nations. As you can see by scatter plot, it's a diagonal relationship. The more the income per capita, the higher the life expectancy. So here, Burundi with 50 years falls at the low, extreme low end, and Sweden with the higher 81 years life expectancy falls at the high end of income per capita. So it is the level of income, level of affluence that has a strong saying in how long we live in this world. And in response in alarming statistics like this, it was in early 2000 that the World Health Organization set up a global initiative called social determinants of health. Income is one of the social determinants of health. There are area of factors that have direct and indirect and strong impact on the outcome of our health and development, and we call them collectively as social determinants of health. So WHO commissioned Sir Michael Mermet, a world-renowned epidemiologist from UK, and asked Dr. Mermet to put together a global team of experts on different social determinants of health and take a look at these issue of social determinant of health and see how can we take these determinants as entry point and enhance the state of health, but also make health a more equitable commodity for everybody, not for certain class of privileged ones. So Michael selected 9 social determinants: gender equity, employment, social inclusion, and early child development was one of the determinants. And then he looked across the world and he identified centers with capacity and expertise to investigate that social determinants of health. My former home institute at UBC was designated as the knowledge hub for ECD, early child development. And we took 2 years, 2005 to 2007, intensive research, global scanning, looking at best practices, who is doing what, who has managed to improve the level of children's young early years development, what policies, what programs, and the other 8 centers also did the same for their own social determinant. And in 2008, we all submitted our reports to the commissioner. The commissioner put them together in a book that we know today as the Commissioner's Report, WHO Commissioner's Report, titled Closing the Gap in a Generation. How can we close this gap and make equity and promote equity? And our chapter 5 in that book is about early child development. We titled it Equity from the Start. We made 20-some recommendations in that chapter, and the overarching declaration of WHO was that social determinants of health are responsible for almost half of the variation in health outcomes, and early child development is one of the most potent ones. One of the major messages of this chapter was that what happens in early years does not remain content to early years. Early year impacts the course of human life. It's not just a part of human life and human development. It is indeed the human development. And the impact is so strong, and it's so easy for us to set the tone right in this period that it is a waste if we go and invest elsewhere. ECD gone wrong can translate to school failure, teen pregnancy, and criminality in second decade of life. In the third and fourth decade, it leads to obesity, elevated blood pressure, depression. In fifth and sixth decade, coronary heart disease, diabetes, and there are volumes and volumes of work showing these evidence-based claims here. And in the old age, it can even cause premature aging and memory loss. We have come to know even some of the very common symptoms and conditions that forever we have known as the normal wear and tear of body, like osteoporosis. We have accepted that as a normal wear and tear of body. We have now enough evidence to understand that this is a geriatric disease with pediatric origin, and it's closely linked to the calcium balance of early years. So that is the level of, that's the scale of influence these few precious years have in human life. The framework we presented to the commissioner in enhancing early years developmental outcome was this framework we called the Total Environment Assessment Model of Early Child Development, or TMECD. The TMECD in a nutshell says child development is a biosocial process. If we want to enhance the outcome, we must pay attention to both components, the biology of the child and the quality of social experiences. What happens to that child within these layers and layers of environment, starting from the very proximal environment, which is the environment of family. What's the level of maternal education? Is there substance abuse? What about maternal depression, etc.? And then going out to neighborhood, is there opportunity for play? Is neighborhood safe? And then the environment of countries, what kind of policies coming from national level? Is mother gets paid for maternity leave? Is there unemployment insurance? And then finally, the global environment. What is happening at the world at the time that this child is developing? One of the current issues now we are dealing is climate change. And climate change affects the whole life spectrum, but the most devastating effect is on young children. We just currently submitted a manuscript on that. So with this framework, we made 20-some recommendations in our chapter, and the two recommendations that are very relevant to what the project that we will be talking about, the Global Child, were these. Monitoring processes of ECD is pivotal. We can't just do policy that program this initiative. We have to pause every now and then. It's very intuitive, but we forget often. We have to pause and see what is the impact of these processes and policies on children. And then we need to make global alliances because ECD is so powerful, because its impact goes well beyond the borders, so should be our efforts. We have to reach hands, pull resources together and work on ECD issues internationally. So while this was happening in the World Health Organization, there was something else happening in another UN agency, seemingly different but really connected. The Committee on the Rights of the Child, as you know, is the treaty body for Convention on the Rights of the Child. The committee was dealing with a dilemma. Since 1989 that the CRC was introduced, by 2002, the committee had reviewed tens of reports and had come to an alarming observation that despite the fact that Article 1 clearly defines child as any individual below the age of 18, most of the reports coming to committee are looking at the older cohort of children. And the countries, for most of the countries, are overlooking younger children and are not reporting on them. So this was alarming because this was assumed that the state parties, if they are not writing about children, it's an indication that they are not taking their obligations seriously about young children. And this is the tip of the iceberg and needs to be rectified. So on the circumstances like this, when there is a serious issue with this convention, the committee takes days of discussion. In 2002, committee took a day of discussion and spent the entire day on discussing how can we implement CRC for young children. And the outcome of that day became General Comment 7, a guiding document that says implementing CRC for early years. At the same time, in the UN agencies, the ambiance was very agreeable about indicators and monitoring tool and assessment tools. Office of High Commissioner was echoing the statements of this from the High Commissioner, and different treaty bodies, 9 of them, they were all setting up meetings to understand what is this indicator they are talking about? Well, how can we create indicators? How can we operationalize our human rights treaties? So when we took a look at General Comment 7, we saw a great deal of similarity between the framework we submitted to WHO and what General Comment 7 says. It was exactly like General Comment 7 was drafted to create articles to safeguard each and every one of those environments. There were articles talk about the child himself or herself. There were articles talking about the family and responsibility of parents and the government's role to support parents. There were articles about residential area, children's right to play, relational communities, right to religion, right to ethnic heritage, and so on and so forth. So we understood that Team ECD and General Comment 7 are talking about the same thing in 2 different languages. We're talking from public health point of view, from group of people who are in child development, and they are talking in legal terms and human rights language. And we thought, well, wouldn't that be so powerful if we merge these 2 together? So what happened next was that we approached a group of us, led by the late Professor Clyde Hertzman, went to Geneva and talked to the committee and stated that we can, if we take this General Comment 7 and substantiate it with all we know about children's development and operationalize it in a simple way that the state parties can use it in a simple, user-friendly manner, then this document is valuable. Otherwise, as good as it is, as it's created in good intention, very comprehensive, it's going to remain on the shelf, like many of the UN agencies that we know. So the committee deliberated, and the next year wrote a letter to us, invited us to put together an ad hoc group and start on operationalizing General Comment 7. Between 2006 and 2008, operationalizing General Comment 7 started. We put this group together. My program at HELP was International Wing of Health, and we acted as the secretariat. There were a number of UN agencies, international NGOs, and some philanthropies and donors. By 2008, we had completed the indicators, and we submitted to committee. The committee was very interested and enthusiastic about the indicators we had developed. What we had developed, basically, we had taken General Comment 7 and created 17 sets of indicators relevant to 17 different childhood rights, from right to birth registration to right to breastfeeding, right to play, etc. All these indicators had the same generic structure. They all comprised of 3 sets of simple questions: structure-related questions, process-related questions, and outcome-related questions. Structures to indicate the state's respect of the right in the form of policies and laws, legislations. Process, protecting the right, how do we enact those policies, through what programs, what processes, and then outcome, what has happened to children as a result of these processes and structures in place. I give you an example of one of the indicators, protection of children against violence. Example of structure question is, are there measures in place to ensure adequate data collection on violence? Example of process question is, are there initiatives to raise awareness and prevent violence? And outcome is, has there been a reduction in the level of the violence against children since last 5 years or since your last report? Anytime the answer is yes, the respondent has to provide supporting document, and if the answer is no, then the electronic version of it, which was digitized later, provides some suggestions so the countries do not have to start from scratch. We provide the best practices, what can be done if there is no initiative for awareness raising. And bear in mind, this is for all over the world. So these might sound very rudimentary for us, but this has to apply to Sub-Saharan Africa, to Southeast Asia, and many other underdeveloped countries. So the suggestion for awareness raising would be positive parenting, in-service training of professionals, and public education. And then we provide links to go to those examples and find some key names and contact info for countries to start. When we presented the indicators in the committee wrote to us and advised. From very beginning, every year we went to Geneva and made a progress report. When we presented the indicators, they wrote to us and they advised us to pilot it in 3 different jurisdictions based on the level of resource, low resource, middle resource, and high level resource. So with this advice, we created a manual and then took the manual to our first pilot country, Tanzania, as low income. After completion of Tanzania pilot, we went to Chile as we digitized the tool. The digitize is exactly like the physical one. We have some information on the tool, and then we have the indicator, how to fill the questions, and then we have, these are sample questions. If the answer is yes, then no, then we have suggestions opening. If it's partial, we have boxes opening for respondent to explain what part yes, what part no. And if it's yes, then they have to upload supporting document. Every question can have up to 15 supporting documents. So the reports are very evidence-based. And then we, at the end of every indicator, the software, end of every indicator, the software creates a summary based on the questions given, answers given, and then we clone the software to its Spanish version, exact Spanish version, and then we went to Chile and did the second middle income pilot in Chile. And Chile pilot was much more successful than the Tanzania. This is one of the features of the software I like to share with you. After completion of all 17 questions, the software creates what we call heat map. So these are the question indicators, 17. Here we're showing only 15. These are structure, process, outcome questions. When the answer is yes, the software color codes green. If no, there is red, and yellow means partial. So you can see from this is the collective answer of this country, a middle income country. It's not hard to see this is a predominantly green heat map, which speaks about high level of capacity around children's right. And now pay attention to low income country heat map. So this is a summary sheet that at one glance provides what's happening. And if you see all these red under indicator 10 and you're curious, you press on that, click on that, and it takes you back to the original question to understand what were all the questions which were not answered, which were answered no. The point of this heat map is not to compare country to country because the UN committee does not want us to do that. The point is this: if Tanzania had this level of capacity in 2012, this sets the baseline, and it is hoped that by 2017 and then 23, Tanzania will go through this transition. So here we are, and then here, and then here. So some of the reds will change and transform to greens. And then now, last pilot in BC. We arrived at BC, and I thought, we are home free. After being in Sub-Sahara and Latin America and doing pilot in countries that did not spoke Kiswahili and Spanish and very different culture, we experienced challenges. Now we are home. We are doing pilot in our own country. Well, that wasn't the case. But we will get back to that. So, child rights in Canada. Let's pause and we switch a little bit. How are we doing in child rights in Canada? remember this, compared Sweden and Burundi. We exactly mirror Sweden's situation. We have a life expectancy of 81, and we occupy the top right-hand corner of this chart. So by virtue of, this is an indicator of wealth, and this is an indicator of health. So by virtue of this position we hold in this graph, it's not far to say that we are a healthy, wealthy nation. But are we a healthy, wealthy nation? So in terms of wealth, the median income in Canada is just about 30,000, while top earners earn more than close to 200,000. Income distribution is the better, more valid indicator of wealth than the net income. How that income is distributed. It's not only better indicator of wealth, it's also indicator of health, because in Canada, 47%, only 47% of low-income people describe their health as very good, versus 73% of high-income people, they think they have a very good health. So in Canada, what we have is social gradient in health. Social gradient in health means that the difference is not just between the very wealthy and very poor. Health status difference is not just between very wealthy and poor, but going from every level of income to the one lower, we see a pronounced decline in the health status. And that is social gradient of health, and mirrors itself very clearly in children's development. This is the data from BC. On the x-axis, we have level of family income going from poorest to well off, and here is percent vulnerability of children before entering school measured by EDI. EDI is now a pan-Canadian initiative. It's happening in all of your provinces. It's an instrument that measures children's development at kindergarten. Every child in Canada, when they arrive at kindergarten, after 2 months, when there isn't enough time for teacher to know this child, teacher spends 20 minutes per child and sits down and fills a questionnaire. And that questionnaire assesses child's development in 5 domains. And it really tells us if this child is ready to learn, because soon he or she is going to go to school. As you can see here in Canada, in BC, going from well-off families to very poor families, level of vulnerability of young children increases 2.5 times. So we can have the state-of-art schools, we can have most qualified professionals, most impressive curriculum. If the child is not ready to learn, we know the outcome of all that effort. Children's development follows social gradient, and we have a steep one in BC. And children's development, fortunately, income doesn't get to have the last saying, because other social developments also create social gradient in children's development. Here in y-axis, this is from our own work in Vancouver with about 1,000 preschoolers. Here we have level of maternal education, and here we have cortisol level. Cortisol in here measures children's stress level. These children are all in low-income families, so they are all exposed to negative ramifications of daily stress of living in low-income family. But see what's happening. Under the same negative circumstances, children who are living in households with parents with higher education have 1/3 of the stress that children living in households with not high school graduate moms. So what this is saying really, these children are sort of buffered against stressors, even though the environment is the same. The scarcity of the material, basic material is the same. So you can appreciate how many ways we can operationalize this key piece of information and to make it work for our children. In Canada, we have become signatory to CRC in 1990, one of the early ratifiers. Not only we ratified early, we also took a very welcoming state. Prime Minister Brian Mulroney hosted a World Summit in New York and encouraged other nations, other states also to come and ratify this human rights treaty. And we went a step further, and we reaffirmed our commitment to CRC by being one of the first developed countries who developed their action plan based on CRC. We call that a Canada Fit for Children. But in Canada, we have challenges with CRC. We lagged behind. Really, we started on a strong feet, but we lagged behind. Now we have two sets of serious challenges, challenges with monitoring and then challenges with compliance. In terms of monitoring, we sent our first report in '94, second report 2001. We skipped third report, and we sent third and fourth together in 2010. In a way, the predicament of our children was hidden from international eyes for about a decade. And this is serious undermining of children's rights. And now we are due next year, soon. We blame some of these difficulties on our structure, on governance, our decentralized governance model, because every province writes their report, sends to Ontario, and Ontario puts together and sends to Geneva. And if you talk some of the former chairs of the committee who are members of the Global Child team, they would tell you that Canada's report looks like 13 different countries' report. Quebec talks about childcare, BC talks about healthcare, Northwest Territory talks about foster care. We want to know all these in all Canada. And then last but not least, simple things like we have to follow treaty-specific guidelines. There is a protocol that we have to follow to put reports. We're not following that, so much so if you look at our last concluding observation, there's a clause at the end that says, if your report comes back not following treaty-specific guidelines, the committee is forced to send it back. So also we have challenges with compliance. Statistics like that, this is like preaching to the choir, considering the mandate of your job. I'm sure you know these statistics and many more. In Canada, African children, African Canadians are twice more likely to end up in foster care. Our male Indigenous children 3 times more likely to drop high school, and low-income children 3 times more likely to arrive at school when they are not ready to learn. Not only that, the UNICEF NHNT report card, which looks at 40-some country developed and affluent countries' state of handling their children, we almost consistently fall at the bottom of that list. This is the one that they produce for child poverty, and look at that, we have 16.9% child poverty. Even Croatia has less than us. So, what's going on? Where are these inequities? Where are these dire outcomes coming from when we are one of the most wealthy nations on the planet? Inequities in developmental outcomes and opportunities originate from differential policy implementation and service provisions. If we differentially implement, if we provide service differentially, the outcome is bound to be differential. We can't have homogeneous outcome if our conduct hasn't been homogeneous. Combining the success we experience with ECRI, which we put the science of child development and the political power of the convention together, now we have proposed to create a tool that will facilitate monitoring policies and processes designed for children and their impact on children, not just these policies and processes. And we call that Global Child. Global Child will be the world's first comprehensive child rights monitoring platform. We have the plan. This is a 5 + 5 years project. The first 5 years, we are honored that this is hosted in Canada, happening in Canada, and funded by generous funds from the Canadian Institute for Health Research and Michael Smith Foundation. So the first 5 years we'll take in Canada. During the first 5 years, first year, we will develop the indicators. We will operationalize the CRC article by article. And then we will subject the developed indicators to 2 sets of advisory group. The first one will look at it from the indigenous point of view and will basically customize it for our children, for our indigenous children. And the second one will create a French global child. Then we will digitize the 3 sets and we will develop what we call the Global Child Platform. The Mother Global Child, which will be in English, Indigenous Global Child or IGC, and Francophone Global Child or French Global Child. Then the plan is in the following year to pilot these in Francophone, Anglophone, and Indigenous regions of Canada. And then putting the learning of these pilots, we like to finalize the Global Child and create a protocol for CRC monitoring and CRC report writing in Canada. How can all these 13 regions use one of these 3 and prepare and compile their report and send it to Ontario? And how should these 13 be combined in Ontario to have one unique, single, and comprehensive report for Canada as one country? We have a great deal of national, international partners and collaborators, and we have children themselves collaborating. The structure that we have placed, it's secretariat at UVic. Then we have a steering committee. We have a larger working team from national and international institutions and universities, and then wider consultation that will happen with experts through internet. And then the outcome will be also subjected to a reference group that I will introduce to you. The reference group put for this are members of UNCRC itself, UNICEF, WHO, Save the Children, Child Rights Connect, SOS, and European Council of Human Rights and Office of High Commissioner. We have put together a stellar team of global movers and shakers of the world in the world of children's rights. The steering committee of Global Child is headed by Honorable Jean Zermatan, who was the chair when our last report was reviewed in 2012. We have made every attempt to have representation of every region of the world in the steering committee, but also representation by expertise area. Jean presents juvenile justice, that's his specialty, and he was the chair for 2 terms. I myself bring the child development aspect to the table. Dr. Zulfikar Bhutto is the president of the International Pediatric Society. He's from health sector. He's a Pakistani pediatrician. Susan Bissell is the child protection. She is the director of the Global Partnership to End Violence. Cindy, our own Cindy, represents, of course, the indigenous children of Canada and hopefully world at large. And then Najat Malala from African region, from the African Child Policy Forum. Dr. Kishore Singh is from India and is the UN Rapporteur for Education. Renata Winter is a judge from Austria, and she is the current chair of the UNCRC committee. George Mushus presents European Network of Ombudsperson and Government of Canada. We recently, at the time this was made, I didn't know, but recently we received a letter from Heritage Canada, and they had introduced Diane Hashe from Heritage to work with us on this. And last not least, our precious Landon Pearson, the Senator of Children. So with this level of expertise and this level of enthusiasm, we are embarking on making Global Child, but still, this is, you can appreciate, it's a huge undertaking to operationalize the Human Rights Treaty with 40-some articles. The Global Child that we envision will have certain characteristics. In the interest of time, I'm just going to go through some of them. It will provide a menu feature. I don't know, some of you might have heard the committee may change the way it asks countries to report. Previously, it was reporting on every 9 reporting cluster, and now committee is experimenting on asking countries, depending on the issues of interest in any given country, committee is thinking to ask countries to report on certain cluster. For example, in Canada, maybe they'll ask us report on general measures of implementation, versus in UK, they may ask report on cluster of health, or in some other place, cluster of education. So we are going to build a menu feature, meaning that these 9 clusters, we will have all articles under all 9 clusters. For example, this is civil rights. 7 articles under this. We will operationalize all clusters one by one. This will give a menu feature if the committee goes ahead with the new non-comprehensive way of reporting, so the countries will have an easy way of just choosing the cluster of interest and filling their report on that. The second feature is that, like ECRI, it will follow the structure, process, outcome, indicators structure. Then the third is that we will not reinvent the wheel for every article. We have done a comprehensive desktop review of who's done what on what article, and we have compiled a great deal of information. So we're going to reuse and recycle some of that work when we see the evidence of efficacy. And similar to ECRI, once the questions are responded, we will have heat map created, and we will seek children's opinion. We all know that one of the shortcomings or the serious criticism that has been done on CRC is the fact that human rights treaty developed for children and talking about the value of child participation never opened any space for any child to participate in the process. So we have every intention to overcome this shortcoming, and we are in negotiation, in conversation with Queen's University of Belfast to set up an online consultation with children as we are developing these indicators. And then we'll have the feasibility of tracking the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. For the next 15 years, we know that the world is going to be talking about Sustainable Development Goals. We will cut and paste child-focused sustainable development targets, and we will tag them with SDGs. So they will go all through the indicators. So at the end, if we want to go to certain indicator and just extract the SDGs, there will be a button to click, and then the outcome of that will be the compilation of only SDG-related questions. So that will provide visibility of tracking the progresses in SDGs as well. And then last not least, we have commitment, serious commitment in Canada for truth and reconciliation, and we will make sure Global Child works for this huge responsibility. We have plans for creating Indigenous Global Child, and these are just some of the example action plans that are right up our alley in terms of Global Child being able to provide a database that we can monitor and follow progress made in truth and reconciliation. And database child advocacy is really becoming the theme. It's a concept that is growing now. Database child advocacy refers to the use of data, statistics, and science to advance discussion and debate about topics relevant to child rights as well as child well-being. If I showed you the graph in the beginning, I really needed very little convincing for you to accept that health is an inequitable commodity, because data speaks itself. And that's the power of database advocacy. Advocacy becomes so much easier. Gone are the days that advocacy and science stayed at two ends of a spectrum. Now, over and over, we combine our work, the researchers, the scientists, and all that. In our own BC, we have my own program of research has been fortunate to build relationship with advocacy, with service providers, and we have seen lots of good benefits coming out of it. When I talk to you about a CRE third pilot, we experienced great deal of challenge in BC because we had difficulty in attracting government's partnership to help us collect that data. And when the data collected, we needed at least the government to verify the validity of data before we write the report. For 1 or 2 years, we partners with Vancouver Island Health Authority for piloting ECRI. They funded the project, and they contributed many in-kind ways with researchers and all that. And then when we came to the dead end of data that needs to be verified, and no government to be seen to partner to help us with verification, our steering committee and the attention of our steering committee was drawn to our BC Representative of Children and Youth Office. And Mr. Bernard Richard had just arrived in his new office in BC, and when we brought this up, it was just so easy. Bernard generously opened his resources for us to have the data verified through our CY office staff. And now we have put together with Island Health and BCR CY and our own program, partnered and put together a grant that we will set up a child rights symposium to inform the stakeholders on what we learned from ECRI pilot. And we were successful just last week to receive a grant from Michael Smith Foundation. So this is, for me, a partnership that has benefits for all three parties, and above all, it works for children. It breaks silos and reinforces brings our mandates together and reinforces our efforts. Because we know that the influencing policy and its outcome is a process of ongoing interaction between various actors. It's a daunting task, but if we come together, we can do that. I have a quote to finish with. My dear friend and esteemed colleague, Young-Gae Lee, always says, in order to have children's rights implemented and attended, we must take a leap. And for a while, I didn't understand, what do you mean by take a leap, like jump? And then I saw in one of her presentations, she finished with this. We must take a leap. We must have laws and policies as the foundation of those rights for children. We must educate, top to bottom, bottom up, bureaucrats, public, children, everybody. We must raise awareness, especially at the public level, and we must really keep an eye on prevention of the rights violation, not rectifying the violations. And I want to add to that, we must also monitor our leap. We must monitor it all. And Global Child, and that's the essence of Global Child, pausing and monitoring our action every now and then. I want to pause here and thank you for your attention. We can entertain questions if you have any.